Part 1. When the small plane dipped below the clouds, all I could see was endless white. The Arctic stretched in every direction, a frozen desert of snowdrifts, icy rivers, and distant mountains that shimmered faintly under the pale sun. The pilot glanced at me with a grin that said, "You're not ready for this." We landed on a strip of hard-packed snow, where 3 men in heavy reindeer hide parkas waited. Their faces were red and weathered, their eyes sharp against the wind. This was my new family for the week, hunters whose lives revolved around survival in the harshest climate on Earth. They spoke little at first, letting me take in the biting -50 air that stung my lungs with each breath. The leader, an older man named Mikhail, handed me a fur hood and thick mittens. "Without these, you won't last an hour," he said in a deep, calm voice. My city jacket suddenly felt like paper against the Arctic wind. We loaded my small bag onto a wooden sled, hitched to a team of huskies. Their breath came out in clouds. As they barked, eager to run, the ride to their settlement was like traveling through another world. The snow was so bright it hurt my eyes, and the wind cut through every gap in my clothing. The dogs moved fast, weaving over frozen lakes and around ridges of ice. Occasionally, Mikhail would point to a patch of land and say a single word, elk or fox, but otherwise, the only sound was the hiss of sled runners over snow. When we arrived, I saw only a handful of low wooden cabins half buried in snowdrifts. Smoke curled from chimneys, and reindeer stood tethered nearby, their thick coats covered in frost. Inside Mikhail's home, the air was thick with the smell of burning driftwood and boiled fish. His wife, a small but strong woman named Anya, handed me a steaming cup of tea made from Arctic herbs. It was earthy and bitter, but it warmed me from the inside. That first night, I learned the rhythm of Arctic life. Nothing happens without reason. Every piece of clothing, every movement outside, every fire built, all of it is done with survival in mind. There's no room for waste or mistakes. I slept under layers of fur, the wind howling outside, wondering what the next 7 days would bring. Part to the Arctic morning doesn't come with a sunrise. It comes with a faint blue glow on the horizon, as if the world is only half awake. When I stepped outside, the snow under my boots groaned like old wood, and each breath instantly turned to frost on my scarf. Mikhail was already outside, sharpening his long hunting knife with slow, deliberate strokes. Today, we would follow the tracks of a fox that had been stealing from their traps. The dogs sensed the work ahead, pacing and yelping. Before we left, Anya handed each of us a small pouch, dried fish and frozen reindeer fat, the kind of food that can be eaten without cooking in the bitter cold. Out here, meals are more about survival than taste. We moved across the tundra for hours. The wind shifted constantly, blowing loose snow into small, swirling ghosts that danced across the ice. Mikhail and his 2 sons scanned the horizon like they were reading a map only they could understand. At one point, Mikhail raised his hand, and we stopped. Ahead, a dark speck moved against the white. The fox. The hunt was quick but not easy. The animal darted and vanished into a snowbank, forcing us to circle round. Sinking up to our knees in drifts, Mikhail's younger son, Pavel, set a snare with practiced hands, whispering something about the old ways, a method his grandfather had taught him. They didn't carry rifles for such game. It was about skill and patience. By the time we returned to the village, the daylight was fading. The fox would be checked on tomorrow. Tonight, there was another task, checking the fishing net set beneath the river ice. This meant cutting through nearly a meter of frozen water, lowering a long hook, and pulling up the lines. My hands ached just watching them. When the nets came up, they were heavy with Arctic char, their silver scales glinting under the lantern light. Back in the cabin, the fish were cleaned with quiet efficiency, the heads and bones saved for the dogs. As we ate, Mikhail told me, "The cold takes what it wants. You only survive if you take back what you can." His words stayed with me that night, as the wind screamed outside and the cabin walls creaked under the pressure of the storm. Part 3. Life with the hunters was not just about surviving the cold. It was about carrying the weight of generations in every movement. Each day began before the pale light touched the snow, and every task, no matter how small, followed the same rhythm their ancestors had kept for centuries. This morning, the cabin smelled of smoke and melting fat. Anya was already at the stove, boiling a pot of tea made from Arctic herbs, sharp and bitter, meant to warm the body from the inside. Mikhail sat by the window, stitching a tear in his fur mittens with sinew thread. He worked slowly, his breath fogging the glass. Outside, the dogs barked restlessly, sensing the approach of another long day. Today's work would take us deep into the forest to check the lines set for sable. The forest here is a frozen cathedral, black pine trunks standing tall and silent, their branches sagging under the weight of ice. Snow muffled every step, so that even our boots made only a faint crunch. The only sounds were the occasional snap of a frozen twig and the distant howl of wind. Over the open tundra dotted each trap, Mikhail inspected the ground like a detective, reading the signs left by paws and claws. Some traps held nothing, others had been sprung by the wind or buried by drifting snow. But at one site, a young sable lay still, its fur a deep, rich brown, a prize in these lands. Mikhail's son handled it with care, murmuring thanks in a quiet, almost ritual way out. Here, hunting was never just killing. It was a conversation with nature, one where respect was the first rule. Midway through the day, we stopped to rest. A small fire was coaxed to life using dry shavings carried in a pouch, and a kettle was placed over it to melt snow for tea. Anya had packed frozen slices of raw fish, which we dipped in salt and ate quickly before the cold turned them into inedible stone again. My lips went numb, but the warmth of the tea spread through me like a small sun. Back in the village, preparations for the night were just as important as the day's hunt. The nets from yesterday's fishing were thawed and ray-rolled. The dogs fed and rubbed down with straw to dry their fur. Inside, Mikhail showed me the family's hunting gear, some pieces older than he was, passed down from his father and grandfather. That night, the wind shifted, and with it came a deeper chill. The hunters spoke little at dinner, listening to the sound of the storm building outside. It was a language they understood instinctively, the way the timbers groaned, the pitch of the wind against the eaves. By the time I lay in my bunk, I knew that tomorrow would not be an ordinary day. Something in the air felt heavier, sharper, as if the cold itself had teeth. For by dawn, the storm had already erased the world outside. Where yesterday there had been clear paths between the cabins, now there were only rolling dunes of snow, shifting and reshaping under the force of the wind. The air was so full of swirling ice that even a few meters ahead dissolved into a white blur. This was no ordinary snowfall. It was the kind of Arctic storm that hunters here spoke about with a mix of respect and fear. Mikhail was up before anyone else, feeding the dogs early so they would have strength to endure the day in their pen. Their breath came in short bursts, steaming in the frozen air before vanishing instantly. Anya stoked the stove until the iron glowed red, and the cabin walls ticked as the heat fought back against the creeping frost. Outside, the wind made the wood groan like a ship at sea. We had planned to check the far traps, but Mikhail shook his head. Not today. He said simply, today we stay alive. That meant securing everything, from the sleds to the fishing gear, so it wouldn't be carried off by the storm. Even with layers of fur and wool, every step outside felt like walking through knives. The cold pushed into every gap, stealing the warmth from your bones before you could take 3 breaths. In the afternoon, the storm's fury peaked. The sky was gone, replaced by a solid sheet of moving snow. The wind howled so loud it seemed to come from inside your head. We sat close to the stove, the hunters carving new arrow shafts by hand, the steady rhythm of their knives a quiet counterpoint to the chaos outside. I realized then how life here wasn't just about braving the cold. It was about learning to be still when nature demanded it. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted further. The hunters checked the doorframe for ice buildup. If it froze shut, we could be trapped inside until morning. Anya wrapped bricks in cloth and placed them by our feet under the blankets to keep the blood flowing to our toes. Mikhail kept the fire alive with a discipline that came from years of knowing exactly how much wood to burn so that there would still be enough for the next night. At some point in the night, I woke to silence. The wind had stopped. I stepped outside to a world transformed. The sky was a black dome glittering with stars. and the village lay buried under drifts that reached the windows. My breath rose in clouds that froze in the air, falling back as tiny crystals. The hunters joined, me, silent, each of us looking at the frozen landscape as if it were an old friend who had just revealed a secret. In the morning, life would go on. Traps to check, nets to mend, wood to split. But in that moment, standing in the heart of the coldest inhabited place on Earth, I understood something the Arctic hunters had known all along. Here, survival isn't a battle, it's a conversation, and the only way to live is to listen.